Let me bring in Basil Farraj, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at Birzeit University, joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thanks for your time. So we expect around 2,000 Palestinian prisoners to be released from prisons like Ofer, from the Negev. Tell us what sorts of conditions these prisoners have been facing in the Israeli jails, and what's their condition like when they come out?
Thanks, Dareen. So, most certainly we will be witnessing horrific images and videos of Palestinian prisoners who've been subjected to the most brutal and violent torture and humiliation methods by the Israeli prison services, aided, of course, by the Israeli government. We know that since October 7th, while torture and violence had been systematically practiced inside Israeli prisons, these prisoners have been subjected to a brutal campaign in which we have actually described as another war that has been unleashed inside Israeli prisons. They have been starved intentionally. They have been denied medical care. They have been brutally beaten, tortured, and violated. We've witnessed and heard stories of sexual violence. In fact, we're talking about the killing of at least 85 Palestinian prisoners inside Israeli prisons. And I say at least because we know that the Israeli regime continues to hide information about the fate of thousands of Palestinian prisoners, especially
so
the ones who were detained. So that number could be an
underestimate? That number then could be an underestimate?
Definitely. I mean, as we proceed with the ceasefire, we will be hearing about the corpses of Palestinian prisoners who are detained also. We have to remember here that historically, Israel has been retaining the bodies of Palestinian prisoners. They still continue to hold the bodies of Palestinian prisoners now in morgues and in cemeteries of numbers. So, in fact, the images we will see will attest to the horrific natures that Palestinians and their organizations have been telling us from the beginning of the war, that the conditions are brutal, that Israel never and would never adhere to international law. And I think this only tells something about the systematic nature of the torture and violence that Palestinians have been historically subjected to, but in fact have been intensified since the beginning of the war.
What are you hearing about the numbers of Palestinian women and children currently held in jails?
Yeah, so we know that 53 Palestinian female prisoners are held inside Israeli prisons now, in addition to at least 400 Palestinian children, some of which hopefully, I think, according to the numbers we received, would be released, specifically those from the Gaza Strip. But we do know that these numbers, Israel has continuously arrested female and especially children. So we had hoped that, of course, they're released now, but we know that many of them would remain inside Israeli prisons and continue to face the horrific conditions that they have been enduring for the past 2 years. So I think this is also something that we have to highlight. The fact that those prisoners, of course, many of them have been sentenced for life imprisonment. I mean, imagine at least 190 of them have spent decades inside Israeli prisons. This is, of course, their only chance of having freedom after 20 or 25 years in captivity. But we do know that these conditions will continue, and I think this is something that we should bring the alarm for this. That the release of the prisoners now does not mean the end for the struggle of their freedom, but also the struggle to improve their conditions, and to say that what Israel has been exercising inside Israeli prisons is blatantly another step, another phase of the genocidal war it has been unleashing against Palestinian prisoners.
Basil Farraj, stand by for just a moment, because we're going to unpack some of the numbers. Under the deal, roughly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for the 48 Israeli captives. Among them, 1,718 Palestinians from Gaza. The UN considers them forcibly disappeared. Then there are 250 Palestinians from the occupied West Bank, including occupied East Jerusalem. They've been serving life and long sentences, mostly for attacks or alleged involvement in violence against Israelis. 154 will be exiled. 96 are expected to be sent back to the occupied West Bank, and that includes occupied East Jerusalem. And ahead of the exchange, prisoners have been transported to Ofer prison near Ramallah and Ketziat prison in the Negev desert. So these are the live pictures from Ramallah, where we expect the Palestinian prisoners, at least some of them, to be released to. Basil, back to you. What guarantees that those prisoners, once they are released, they are not rearrested once again?
No guarantees, Dareen. In fact, I mean, historically, Israel had re-arrested. I mean, let's just remember the Gilad Shalit exchange deal, where Israel, of course, arrested many of the prisoners who were released as part of that deal. In fact, the recent ceasefire agreements, so in November and January, also led to the re-arrest of Palestinian prisoners. So I think there are no guarantees for the re-arrest. And actually, unfortunately, of course, given that we are living under this brutal colonial regime, the fact that they might be threatened with execution, with killing by the Israeli regime. So there are no guarantees. I think those prisoners, particularly the ones who have spent life sentences behind bar, I think they definitely do face that kind of looming threat continuously. But we have to recall something here. Remember something very important. Being released from Israeli prison does not mean in true liberation, because they would still be subject, at least those who are remaining in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, they would still be subject to Israel's military blockade, to Israel's military regime, which means not only facing the fear of re-arrest, but being controlled. So their livelihoods, their ability to leave. So we have to also question, what does freedom mean under a brutal colonial Zionist regime, such as the ones we have been witnessing? And I just want to center again the fact that those prisoners who we would be, of course, monitoring their situation, but being released from Israeli captivity is definitely at this moment being released from a forthcoming death. So we have to just remember that brutal conditions they have been living under, and of course strive so that they can attain true freedom. Not only them, but also the ones who remain in Israeli custody. And we're talking about, of course, thousands of Palestinian prisoners who would still remain in Israeli prisons and unfortunately face the same brutal and horrendous conditions in captivity.
Basil Farraj, thank you. You're an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at Birzeit University, speaking to us from Ramallah this hour. Thank you so much.
Don't miss out. Get a full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news, expert insight. Like, share, stay ahead.